Did you know you can subscribe to Fireside Chats, CLS's podcast series interviewing all sorts of interesting people at soundcloud.com/Colin's Last Stand or on podcast services, including iTunes? And did you know that Colin's Last Stand is fan-funded? If you want to support CLS, access cool perks, and show your love for independent content, please consider subscribing at patreon.com/Colin's Last Stand. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and support. Now, onto the show. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Colin's Last Stand side quest right here on YouTube. My name is Colin Moriarty. As always, I hope today's video finds you and yours very well. This topic was once again determined by patrons over at patreon.com/Colin's Last Stand, and those that financially support this show. And this is the first time in Colin's Last Stand history, regardless of what show we're talking about, where we had to have a tiebreaker vote to determine this topic. The topic today is PlayStation 5, a console that's not been announced, but that definitely exists and is coming, I think, in 2019. And we're going to be discussing this console many times throughout the coming months and years, but I think this is a great starting point to begin the discussion, to frame various points of the discussion. So I just want to talk about what I think are some of the things Sony should do with PlayStation 5 moving forward, and that I hope it works out just like PlayStation 4 worked out for all gamers. So without further ado, when PlayStation 4 was announced in early 2013, the conjecture was wild. Home consoles were assumed to be dying or dead. iOS and Android games were going to take over the world. The few hardcore players left would just plug their PCs into their televisions, and Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo would be left out in the cold. These prognosticators were all the more emboldened by Wii U's crash and burn launch the year prior, and by forecasts that showed the best for the mobile market and the worst for the traditional market. Even on the back of Sony's excellent showing in Manhattan that revealed to the world a long-struggling company that finally seemed to get it, expectations were tempered at best and cold at worst. It wasn't an uncommon thought to assume that PS4, alongside Xbox One, would be the last video game consoles. Of course, the prognosticators were dead wrong, much to the delight of millions upon millions of hardcore console gamers around the world who, with renewed vigor and interest, took to the resurgent market. Fast forward not even 4.5 years later, and PS4 is hurtling towards 80 million units sold. When all is said and done, it'll at least be the fourth best-selling console in history, and certainly has the potential to be one of only 4 consoles to reach the 100 million sold mark, joining esteemed company in the PlayStation, PlayStation 2, and Wii. These numbers aren't at all insignificant, especially in today's hyper-competitive entertainment climate. The video game market is growing, it's on an upswing. It's more accepted and mainstream than ever. A lot of that is thanks solely to Sony's efforts with the PlayStation 4. So the question must be asked, how could Sony possibly follow it up and find similar or even greater success? Let's be clear, the pressure is going to be crushing. And rest assured, what's next is coming quicker than you might think or even want. Next-gen PlayStation games are in active development, and, as I've said in the past, I wouldn't at all be surprised if the console is revealed by this time next year and launched in the fall of 2019. For the sake of today's exercise, let's call the new console PlayStation 5 or PS5, likely monikers given Sony's naming scheme to this point. But who knows what it's going to be called? I was positive PS4 wasn't going to be called PS4 due to the unlucky nature of the number 4 in Japanese culture, yet I was dead wrong. But I digress. I'm not going to get caught up in the hardware itself, as I have neither the knowledge or interest to do so. I'll leave that to more technically minded pundits. Instead, I want to focus on everything else. From revealing the console to the world, to marketing it properly, to engineering a console that gives players everything they want and expect, to managing the ever-important first and second-party portfolios, to maintaining relationships with third-party publishers, to continuing to nurture a vibrant independent scene. Well, there's a lot for Sony to grapple with. I'm sure there are plenty of people deep within the company's various worldwide headquarters already hard at work on all of these challenges and others. But from an outside perspective, we can begin to develop an idea of what they might do and why, and how everything might appear when it finally comes time to see the machine, and all it's hopefully capable of, for ourselves. The biggest challenge Sony is going to have is convincing people that what's next is truly worth owning, a challenge they ran headlong into during 2005 and 2006, when PlayStation 2 was gearing up to be eclipsed by PS3. As you likely already know, Sony got so much wrong with PS3 before, at, and after launch, even after the console's quiet year-long delay. The company was incredibly cocky, stupidly dismissive of its competition, and woefully prepared for what the future of gaming would look like. For instance, you may remember that the original PlayStation Store ran on a browser, because Sony didn't even think it was important enough to make it run natively. You may remember its $600 price point, insane by any standard, that was supported by unthinkable corporate bravado. You may remember that Blu-ray just didn't move units like DVD did for PS2, and that PS3's bizarre internal architecture made making games for it incredibly difficult. So much went wrong. Ultimately, it took nearly the entire generation for PS3 to claw its way out of the hole Sony dug for it. The fact that PS3 sold even half of the 80+ million units it ended up selling is testament to the loyalty of the PlayStation fanbase. Thing is, PS4 has always been great, and it has rather stealthily integrated itself into global entertainment centers the way Microsoft so overtly and desperately wanted with Xbox One. PlayStation 4 is, for casual owners and gamers, a very capable machine even to this day. It runs quickly and smoothly, it has entertainment options and perks galore, and it, well, works just fine for lack of a better term. And if you want more power, there's an iteration for that in the form of Pro. Gaming generations typically last 5 or 6 years. PS3 and Xbox 360's generation lasted longer only because of the catastrophic global recession that took place during their life cycles. But it may be harder for more disconnected consumers to understand the hype. The games are already super fun and incredibly pretty. Every conceivable streaming service is already there. Games are launching each week. The interface is about 5,000 times smoother, faster, and more logical than PS3's. PlayStation Network isn't quite the punching bag it once was. PlayStation Plus already is an affordable and worthy service, and on and on. So how does Sony get people to bite when so many of its customers are already so satisfied, while also keeping in mind that half of adult Americans, as an example, can't afford a $400 emergency, nonetheless a new shiny piece of hardware? These kinds of purchases are big, and for many, they aren't to be taken lightly when you already have something you love. As I suggested a couple of videos back when I discussed Microsoft's unending persistence in making Xbox One better even as it gets trounced on the market, Sony should look to make PS5 a well-rounded and capable machine, even if it sacrifices precious dollars in doing so. As an example, the obvious reason PlayStation 4 doesn't read PS3 discs or allow access to PS3's PlayStation Network to download games is because Sony realized it could sell those games again. Microsoft figured out how to make Xbox One work with Xbox 360 games well after the hardware was finalized and launched, meaning this lift, while heavy, isn't impossible, specifically in a pre-release environment. PS5 should read PS5 discs and access PS5's PSN, of course, but it also, at the very least, needs to allow access to PSN games going all the way back to PlayStation 3, read PS3 and PS4 discs, even if it means they act simply as a gate to downloading the product digitally. And work should be undertaken to round out robust PS1 and PS2 catalogs too. Why can PlayStation 3, PSP, and Vita play PS1 games, but PlayStation 4 can't? None of it makes sense. The ecosystem must be unified. That way, Sony can simply point backwards and tell everyone that this upgrade not only gets you all that's next, but it allows access to what's already been in ways unprecedented in both PlayStation and wider gaming's history. The console's price point must also be attractive, and I maintain that $400 is the sweet spot. PS4 launched at that price and it worked, while Xbox One went to $500 and it proved disastrous. Anything less than $400 is likely an unreasonable ask, considering how advanced the console's innards are going to be, and, as always, inflation is a bitch. Dollars simply don't go as far as they used to, and that also must be taken into account. As I've discussed in the past, I doubt next-gen games are going to be $60 at retail, $70 is a safer bet. So publishers and developers in the AAA sphere must also endeavor, with the help of Sony, to make their games pack an extra wallop. Sony can start to pave the way with their own studios, which is where things get truly exciting, but where things also get a little nerve-wracking. Because if one thing is clear, it's that Sony studios aren't totally aligned timing-wise to hit out the gate with PS5. Think about it this way. What studios does Sony own that could be ready to go with PlayStation 5, whether at launch or in the first year to 18 months? We could likely check a few off the list for sure. Naughty Dog's The Last of Us 2 will come to PS4 in 2019, likely after the reveal of PlayStation 5, but certainly before the console launches. Media Molecule is still somehow working on Dreams, a game it started before PS4 was even revealed, and sadly, I'm not entirely convinced Media Molecule will even be around very long once Dreams launches, though I hope I'm wrong. Sony Ben's Days Gone will come to PS4 at some point, probably sooner than later. Polyphony just launched Gran Turismo Sport, and they always like to take their time, and Sony Santa Monica's God of War, coming in just a couple of months, will stop them from being anywhere close to ready. You're not going to see these guys on PS5 anywhere close to launch. What you may see, though, are 2 games announced for PlayStation 4 that might actually be cross-generational games, or, more tantalizingly, actual PS5 exclusives. I've long maintained that Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding is actually a PlayStation 5 game, and I completely stand by that. But is it possible that Sucker Punch's Ghost of Tsushima is also a PS5 game? Maybe yes, maybe no. It was announced for PS4 for one, and Sucker Punch hasn't put out a game since I still worked at IGN, so it's been a very long time. But does PS4 really need more exclusives? The next 18 months will give us God of War, Days Gone, Detroit Become Human, Spider-Man, The Last of Us 2, and Dreams plus others. Doesn't it make more sense to push some projects to the next console to manage the exclusives that will draw people in? Throw into the mix Guerrilla Games, who just delivered a generational tour de force with Horizon Zero Dawn, and you have something potentially special cooking. How cool would it be to see Horizon 2 on PlayStation 5 by 2020? It's certainly possible, if not likely. You may notice that two of the exclusives I mentioned, Detroit and Spider-Man, are actually second-party games, and Sony should double down here too, just as it did during the PS3 era, and early in the PlayStation 4 era. Nintendo has been doing a great job of this by getting into the bed with the likes of Namco Bandai and Platinum Games, and Sony should rev their engine to make sure they're finding the best and brightest talent to round out their catalog. Meanwhile, it seems Sony's renewed attention on third-party relationships, DLC exclusives, and unique PlayStation-centric opportunities have paid off with the likes of Activision and Ubisoft. Keeping the pedal to the metal in those respects will be essential in bringing in the vaunted games-as-a-service crowd, those who love the stickiness of Destiny 2, The Division, or Call of Duty, and who spend incremental amounts of money that allow the entire ecosystem to keep ticking. Sony also crushed it with independent developers during the PS4 cycle, although I think they've gone too far in the other direction here. PS5 can be greatly helped by putting quality control and other restraints on publishing to allow the great games to bubble up. There's no need for there to be 10 games a week on PS5 like there often is on PS4, especially because pretty much no one is playing most of these games. So why are they on the store at all? Sony has to nail this, or risk the PlayStation Store turning into the App Store or Steam, and no one wants that. One question we can't ignore, and that Sony can't ignore either, is how Nintendo Switch has changed the market, particularly when it comes to how we all view handhelds. Nintendo has long dominated the handheld market, and Sony is 1 for 2 there, with the 80 million selling PSP followed by a Vita that barely did a quarter of those numbers. I still love you, Vita. I have often said that Sony is the one company crazy enough to jump back into handhelds again, and that was before Switch took off. Will Sony revisit the handheld space, perhaps in direct and intimate unison with PlayStation 5? It's important to note that Switch isn't even as powerful as PS4, so a handheld console hybrid for PS5 is basically out of the question. But will Sony explore a way to please that resurgent market, or will it cede it entirely to Nintendo? Could PlayStation 5 have some sort of handheld component? Perhaps, but it's obviously very unlikely. More likely is PS5's connection to a second-generation PSVR unit, one that hopefully kicks away the clutter of wires, the extra box, and the inelegant nature of all of it for something more streamlined. Likewise, could PlayStation 5 be modular? For nearly 2 decades, we've discussed modular consoles in our space, and with N64, we actually had one to a degree. Could the next PlayStation be something designed to last far longer than a generation, with a plug-and-play mentality endemic to the computer gaming space finally crossing over? These are unknown questions, but ones worth pondering as we look into the future. One question we don't need to ponder, though, is the future of DualShock 4's touchpad, which is really dumb and can go away, while the form factor of the controller can and should remain identical. Hey, you can't win them all, Sony. In reality, there's so much to discuss when it comes to the future of PlayStation and PlayStation 5, and this is just a starting point. We'll revisit this topic many times in the months and years to come, beyond a shadow of a doubt. For now, this gives us a few key places to begin contemplating the future, with a more hopeful slant on what's to come than we had as an industry and as a group of enthusiasts, say, 5 years ago. Well, that's it for this episode of Colin's Last Stand SideQuest. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, leave a comment below. I'll be reading them. Thumb up the video if you liked it, thumb it down if you didn't, and please share Colin's Last Stand and SideQuest, as well as Fireside Chats and Knockback, the 2 podcast series CLS does, with friends, family, and the like, and let them know about the might, the majesty, and the wonder of Colin's Last Stand. I will waste no more of your time, but I do appreciate the time you did give me today. I hope you and yours are well one more time, and I will see you next time for more SideQuest. Keep on gaming.